The first question that we want to ask, because while we've done a lot of literature review and examined various frameworks from across the country, across in India as well as across the world, we want to understand how specialists like yourselves understand life skills. And I think I saw it from the abstract itself, Maithreyi, you began with a sort of a definition, discussing the definition of a life skill. So what are the words that come to your mind when you think of this term life skills, which you've done, your entire PhD on?
Thanks, Maya. So definitely, I think life skills are skills that enable children, and not just children, but I also think it's very useful for adults and others. So I definitely think they're skills that enable thinking, acting, and feeling. So like the WHO itself speaks about it, right? They are a set of intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive skills. But what I'd like to add to this definition, which I think is currently missing, is the fact that the idea of these skills become very individualized. So they are very individual focused. And I think a definition of life skills also needs to take into account social location, social position, social relations. So it has a very broad understanding of interpersonal relations, but these interpersonal relations, again, are directed at the self. They are directed at individuals learning how to cope rather than asking questions about what is one's social location and what is one's social context within which you need to negotiate relations, or within which you form identities, within which you need to take decisions. So that's what I feel is currently missing in the definition, and I'd like that to be part of a life skills definition.
Okay, all right. Satya, what do you feel about your, understanding of life skills based on your rich?
Yeah, maybe before I answer the question, like I would like to add where I come from, basically. Like I'm mainly like working with mainly from with the marginalized community or like a vulnerable groups. Like we do whatever the life skill education program or like kind of activity or like an intervention we are doing with mainly from the marginalized community context. So for me, like if you ask me to in a one word, like it's a kind of an empower them, actually kind of an empowerment, like empowerment in like, because all the like it's definitely a skill, but like all the other thing they may get it from the academics or like in other things, but like to equip them to handle the kind of a day-to-day their life situation, I think empowering them is a very important aspect, and that I think they can get it from the life skill educations.
Yeah. So, a lot of times people have a problem with just the word skills. So Maithreyi talked about skills is about interpersonal, intrapersonal, and I think she said cognitive, yes. And then you talked about the social location. What do you feel about the use of the word skill?
I definitely think it's a misnomer. I mean, for a want of a better description of these sets of processes. In fact, in my thesis, that's what I've argued, that these are essentially everyday processes that all of us use, and all of us at some level or the other have capacities in. So it's, I mean, this idea that there is something called life skills versus there are others who don't have this life skills, I first of all find very problematic. So, but I mean, I guess because they have not been able to capture some of these processes with a better word, the term has come to stick as life skills. Also, what I find very disturbing about this term is because of the broad nature of its I mean, semantic meaning, right? It's all about life, so it can be anything related to life. So it could, so for example, during my PhD work, people would describe cooking, then they would describe financial management, and then they would describe exercise, physical exercise as life skills. So for a very long time I just grappled with what is life skills. I didn't really, and of course, because I was trained in psychology, I came with a very certain notion of what is life skills when I started my PhD. And that got completely sort of disturbed by the field, because people in the field were talking about everything as life skills, which in a way I thought was much more equalizing. Like Satya says, it's much more empowering that you consider what people think as important or necessary for their own lives as life skills. But on the other hand, I feel what happens within academic circles, especially psychology, public health, development studies, these circles, developmental interventions, these circles, life skills gets very narrowly defined as psychological skills, as though all of your life is only about the psychology of it. So that to me is very problematic. But I guess, if you would ask me, then what would you call these set of skills? What would you call decision making, or what would you call, self-awareness, critical thinking? I don't think I have a better word.
Yeah. So you talked about, because it is interesting, because some of the people we have surveyed, they have used the word, they have talked about financial literacy, and they have talked about cooking and so on. So where do they fit in? Because those are, I think all of us, every young person should be able to do all of those things, male or female. So where do you think that fits in? And Satya, please, please feel free to also step in.
So maybe I'll just quickly respond.
Yes, you can start, Maithreyi.
Yeah. So I think the Interagency Committee on Life Skills Education makes a clear difference between life skills being these interpersonal, intrapersonal, and cognitive skills versus another set of skills like financial management or other skills, which they classify under livelihood skills. So they say life skills and livelihood skills are not the same skills. So I'm not sure if that kind of a definition or that kind of, division really works. Again, because I think in real world context, people sort of demand or require these skills, especially if you come from certain marginalized groups who may not have, say, access to English language, or may not have access to, these kinds of financial management skills. So I think for them, these skills are about life skills. They are about things that can offer them mobility, offer them, better chances in the future. But having said that, I do feel we really need to think about how do we inculcate what are defined technically as life skills. How do you inculcate processes of thinking, processes of reflecting, processes of understanding yourself in a social context? How do you inculcate this as part of children's socialization or children's development? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I do think there's a difference between financial management skills and these kinds of processes that I don't think is absent in us, but maybe we need to attend to them a little more.
Okay. Yeah. Akhila, Swapnil, Roshna, if you have anything, you can also jump in. But
I do have a follow-up question.
But could we just hear what
Satya has to say?
Satya has to say, and then, thanks. Satya, what do you say about this whole thing of life skills, and talking about cooking and financial literacy, or even now digital literacy as an aspect of life skill?
Yeah, I think the word like the life skill, like I think it's very clear, like skills, some of the skills required to lead a kind of a quality of life, like a better life, basically. Those are the skills that are required. And the problem is like it varies from context to context, and the kind of the different population to a population, basically. Like for example, like some of the things that we consider as a kind of a life skill may not necessarily a kind of a maybe consider for the life skill for the kind of in the urban context. Like they are part of like not necessarily to teach them as a separate life skill for them actually. But like this vary from, like for example, the financial literacy and all those things are like when you consider as a life skill and teach them in a kind of a curriculum, like some context it is not necessary. It's part of our it is embedded in our whole system basically. But in some context, it very like it's really a kind of skill really required. Like for example, in a kind of a joint family context, some of the kind of skill related to a kind of mental health related things like that are like the taught it in a kind of a family environment itself actually. But like some of those things really need to be teach. So that's the reason like the life skill is like a very, it's wide range of skills actually. So it is very difficult to put it like in a kind of a specific framework or within a kind of a framework. I think that's the biggest challenge. So that's a challenge in terms of developing a kind of a comprehensive curriculum for a kind of a life skill. So it varies from like context to context, population to population. The need of the skills will vary from a different context and different populations.
Yeah. Thanks, Satya. Over to you, Akhila. You had a question, follow-up question.
Anyway, my question is related a little to what when Satya just ended
said.
it, but to Maithreyi, when you were talking about how you would like life skills to be defined, you very specifically spoke of what is missing, right? Social locations, social positions, and social context. Could you just elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so so most of the programs that I was actually studying before I came to KHPT, in fact, KHPT was, I'm not advertising our program, but before I came to KHPT, most of the programs I was seeing was actually focused very much on training youth for jobs. So, you know, what you were talking about, this financial literacy skills or skills for teamwork, skills to perform well in an organization, to get a job, keep a job, things like that. That's how it was oriented. Often what would be missing is an understanding, like Satya was saying, of where this individual comes from. Where does this child or adolescent come from? So if you are coming from a context of poverty, which is what I was studying, like in a lot of these government schools, kids would be managing jobs in the morning, jobs at night. They'd come to school, obviously they'd be tired or they'd be sleepy, and they'd get scolded by the teacher. And then the teacher would tell the life skills facilitator, you know, ನೀವು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು, like you should teach these children good behaviors, understand you know, their responsibilities, their roles. They should understand that, you know, these academic marks and outcomes are important. They should understand that they need to get a job tomorrow. As though, you know, this would be very easy for that child to just pick up, considering that the child is coming from a particular context, right? And the other part of it is there would be no discussions around what I meant by social positions, like for example, their caste class positions, their gender positions. So if it was girls, for example, they were constantly you know, burdened with domestic work, of course. But the entire discourse would turn into responsibility of the child. How do these life skills enable responsibility in the child so that he or she performs his or her role perfectly? So you already have a predefined role of the child itself. The child as a student, the child has no other identity other than that of a student. So, you know, all the programs would be around how do you become a better student? How do you improve your marks? How do you get a job? How do you learn skills that will be needed for a job? So I found that extremely burdensome on kids. And often they'd actually tell us things like, you know, these teachers, these life skills teachers tell us the same thing that our regular class teachers tell us. They just do it in a fun manner. That's all. And that's the takeaway. The child is not taking away things about decision making. How do you really sit and reflect before you take a decision? Or the child is not really thinking about who am I? What is my role? The child would just give you these pat answers, right? I have to be a good student. ನಮ್ ಜೀವನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು, like some very broad statement of ನಮ್ ಮುಂದೆ ಹೋಗಿ ನಮ್ ಜೀವನಗೆ ಇದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಇರತ್ತೆ. So they were not really understanding what was the aim of this program I mean, not to say that the program had this aim of actually getting children to become more reflective. So that's what I meant by, you know, there needs to be a further interest in the social location and context of the child, and then sort of match these processes. Essentially, to me, these are processes, these are not skills. Because the minute you say these are skills, I find it very problematic, because the minute you say these are skills, you assume that you either have it or you don't have it. So you can be like, you know, there are people who will excel at it and there will be people who don't excel at it. I think it's essentially about how much room do you give in your everyday life or within the education system to actually express this. If a child actually wanted to take a decision within a classroom, is he or she allowed? Or if he or she wanted to take a decision within the house, is he or she allowed? So these were questions I would constantly ask the life skills programs that I was observing, right? I would say, what happens when you teach this child, this is how you draw a decision tree in class, and you say, this is how you make a decision. You say, this is a good, outcome. This is a negative outcome. Now I have more positive outcomes than negative outcomes. So I have to take this decision. But that decision is contradicting what is happening at home. So if the child goes back home to the parent and says, okay, I want to continue education. I don't care whether you have money or not, but I have to continue. I will go to class regularly and I'm not going to do a job. Is that okay? And what will happen to the child in that context? I mean, you also need to consider the power dynamic that this child is going to be operating within, right? So that's why I find it very problematic to name it skills, because then it's like you can actually gain this or you can't actually gain this. You're not thinking about how are these processes being used? How are you making these decisions? What are your constraints on these decisions? So so I actually find the term skills a little problematic.
Okay. Yeah.
Now the next another. I think that was very useful for us when we're looking at developing a glossary. Your whole understanding of skills versus processes. So, in what way do these processes, whatever they may be, whether it's decision making or process of self-awareness or critical thinking, how do they play an important role in a child's growth and development, in a young person's growth and development? Maithreyi first and then Satya, because I think Satya's perspective on marginalized communities is very important for us also. But Maithreyi, if you could go first.
So I think it's very essential, because if you think about overall development of the child, it's not just academic development, right? Like technically, when you speak of development of the child, you talk about physical, motor development, cognitive development, socio-emotional development, psychological development. So I think these skills actually cut across many of these areas. I mean, even something like, say, physical or motor development, I feel there's a lot of involvement of these processes. Like you make certain decisions around how you want your body to be. You think about physical activity in certain ways. So I feel like they are things that are underlying. But what happens in our everyday sort of interaction with children is we don't really develop this aspect of the child at all. Like how many of us actually sit down with a child and say, okay, let's have a conversation about who you are, what is your identity, where do you come from, what is your location? Or how many of us say, okay, okay, we need to take a decision about something, let's involve the child, let's sit together, let's all use our reasoning skills, let's all put in together our thinking skills and then make this decision. In fact, a lot of literature now in childhood studies is talking a lot about children's agencies and how they have so many different things to offer, in so many different ways in which you can think about the same situation if children were involved in this decision-making process, right? So I feel they're essential. I mean, they're already there. They're present on an everyday basis. It's just that I think we don't attend to them. We don't attend to children taking decisions. So we interpret these decisions for them, right? So if a child's behavior goes contrary to something that we as adults want, automatically it's truancy. It's not the child's expression of agency or the child's understanding of that situation and response to that situation. So it's not an interpersonal communication situation. It's not a communication where the child has thought critically or has acted, after thinking or making some decision, right? So I feel they're there. It's already there. It's just that we don't attend to them in this growing up process at all. We kind of sideline them, and we have these narrow, straitjacketed behaviors that we expect children to follow. And if they follow it, then of course we think children have life skills. Children are making very good decisions. They are very critical. If they don't follow it, then they don't have life skills.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Yes. Satya, what is your thoughts about it, particularly with the
Yeah.
groups that you are
I
working with?
wanted to add on to,
Yeah, carry
yeah.
on.
So I wanted to add on to my point on the considering whether it is a skill or like a kind of a process. Like again, based on some of our experience to work with some of these girls from the marginalized communities and often in Karnataka context, like the problem is like when you standardize this as a kind of, okay, this is a set of skills without knowing the context, without knowing the requirement, and that will be the problem actually. And that is what currently happening also. Like, okay, like financial literacy is a very important skill. Like we will set and then like in the school or like in the other way, like we'll start teaching that. Sometimes that is like, if the skill is not really helping for an individual well-being or like a quality of life, whatever the skill may be, like we may thinking like that's a wonderful skill. If it is not really helping in that context, in that individual, the family environment, and that is no use actually. Like that's what happened. Like when we go and like started interacting with some of these girl, like maybe there, I think like questioning is something maybe a very important skill is required actually. Like for example, the girls we are working, like most of them, like the child marriages are happening like without their consent, like in the age of 16, 17, 14, 15. So when we started like talking about the values and all, okay, the elders is very important. Like our school teacher taught that actually, respecting the elders. That is the kind of an important value in the life. So then I think that's what like the problematic at their level actually, whether we need to like whether in this kind of context, what we need to teach them, like whether the kind of the large set of skills we are thinking that is what very important, or like something a very simple thing like kind of questioning some of these things, questioning some of the norms, or like the gender norms, gender stereotype, social norms exist in this community. I think that's a basic skill for them at that context. So if you standardize the skill, this is what skill, like skill means like, that's the reason that skill is very largely and very loosely used that term actually, like financial literacy, or like a skill comes with a also come from an education, from an capability point of view. Like I think everyone by birth is have an equal skill, like that capability is there actually. But like the environmental factors, the kind of the social norms, or like the gender norms prevailed in the society that don't really uh, act like helps an individual to execute those skills basically.
Yeah.
I think in that point of view, like these, definitely the life skills are very important, but like that needs to be very contextualized. That needs to be thoughtful in terms of what kind of skill is required for this kind of community or this kind of population basically. I think that is very important, I feel.
Yeah. Okay. So, Akila, Swapnil, Roshna, if there's anything you can ask right now. Otherwise, I'm just moving on to the third question, which is in terms of, since we're talking about skills as processes, what are the, Satya talked about just now questioning, I think, and being able to stand up for and question traditions and norms and old prejudices which people have just sort of acquired and so on. I think that is an important thing. Which are the life skills or processes that are essential for their overall growth and development? Maithreyi, you first.
I think so what is technically named as the 10 life skills, right? They are self-awareness, communication. So
The
I would
WHO one.
yeah. I would put something like questioning under communication as well as interpersonal skills. So the thing is, I think these 10 skills for the WHO names, self-awareness, decision-making, critical thinking, creative thinking, empathy, interpersonal relations, managing stress, managing emotions. So I don't think these are separable, and I think they're all important. And I think they sort of cover the domain of your everyday experiences. So to me, all those processes are important. And just to add to what Satya is saying, see something like questioning. So this is what I mean by their processes, and they're already there, but we don't attend to them. So it's natural. Like if you let a child be, for example, in your house or my house or Satya's house, if based on the kinds of environments, the kinds of liberal parenting that we practice at home, it's very natural that children will ask questions, right? And especially they will ask questions about gender.
Or rebel.
Yeah, they will rebel. So if you tell your daughter, go wash vessels, and you don't tell your son that, she's definitely going to stand up and say, why aren't you asking him to do it, right? So they naturally occur. To me, that's why it doesn't seem like something separate that you need to teach. But Satya is right that your contexts allow or don't allow for the expression of these skills. And essentially what I think good life skills programs, like what Satya is talking about, the kinds of programs that are conducted at KHPT can do or try to do, is to allow you to, at least give you that room when nowhere else are you getting that space to ask a question or to like rebel or to, say, this is what I feel. While other contexts may not be giving you the space, when you are able to experience this in one space, then you gradually gain confidence. So if I can ask you a question and you don't get angry at me, then I naturally start wondering, why can't I ask the same question to my teacher? Why can't I ask this question to my mother? So I think basically all of the processes that are named under life skills is important. The ways in which we think about these programs and what we want these programs to do, I think that's where we need to make a change, rather than like, developing this good student, this ideal student. If we can think about it as giving space to students to experience this diverse set of processes, I think we'll be more on track.
Yeah. So you talked about WHO's skills, which they've detailed out. Is there anything that you feel that they have left out, which needs to be considered, especially given our context, India, and the public government school system context, and so on?
Definitely, I don't think in terms of the processes, in terms of the psychological processes, I don't think there's something missing. But like I said, what I think is missing is the orientation to what these processes should be doing. These processes are, very intrinsically linked to social contexts and locations. And I think that is what is missing.
Yeah. Over to you, Satya. Satya, what do you think? Because given the context that you work in, which are the life skills that are vital for our kids?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think all the skills are very important, like agency, basically improving some of their confidence level, communication, negotiation. I think all these skills are very important. But I think again, like connecting these skills, like when especially the execution of these the programs are like when it comes to an implementation stage, it's not blindly like a connect, like okay, I have a kind of a WHO standard 10 skill. I'm going to teach all those skills. I think we need to be mindful when we are executing those skills, actually, which are the population or which are the kind of the setup. Or like, for example, when you are doing some of the life skill education program in the urban population or the urban youth or like the adolescent, maybe they have an excellent communication skill. Not necessarily you need to really do much there. But like we need to connect this skill with the kind of the problem they are facing, understanding, like connecting how really these skills are going to help their life better. So I think connecting the problem and the required skill, then really it makes sense, actually. So that's right. Like execution is an important factor. Then like the skills are definitely important. Like the standardized skills are very important. Those skills are more in psychological in nature. Definitely important, but like when it comes to execution, I think we need to be very mindful, like which skills are required for which population or which community we are working. I think that needs to be really thoughtful.
If I can just add something. Sorry.
Yes.
So, I just wanted to add to that because, so UNICEF, which comes later after WHO gave its 10 life skills and identified them as interpersonal, cognitive, has now reframed them under these categories of learning to live, learning to belong, learning to learn. And I think, so if you think
learning to be.
yeah. So if you think about it from those broad categories, like what Satya is saying, I think the combination can always be flexible, right? So you can have many more skills under learning to be skills processes, or you can have many more under belonging, not just those 10 life skills. And I think that's a useful way to think about what we really want to teach in terms of life skills. But having said that, I also want to add that to me right now, among the skills, what I feel is most lacking and maybe like the least given attention is empathy and critical thinking. So I feel like these two kind of go hand in hand, especially when you look at our current situation, whether it is the political situation or the health related situation. I think the fact that as individuals we don't grow up with this strong sort of emphasis on being empathetic. We focus a lot. I mean, we do focus on thinking, the need to think, etc. But I think what it means to be critical and what it means to be empathetic, I think that's somehow we're missing out completely in our education and socialization of children.
Thanks. Satya, what are your thoughts about? Because you kept talking about, like Maithreyi, about the context and where the young person is located and so on. So are there any specific life skills that are really relevant for our Indian kids? Maithreyi talked about empathy and critical thinking as really vital because we don't give enough attention, pay enough attention to these two processes.
Yeah, I feel like at least in the context we are working, I think the negotiation is an important thing actually, aligned with the kind of the communication. Like again, like aligned with some of this theoretical aspect, I wanted to bring in some of the kind of our own experiences. Like for example, the girls we are working in Northern Karnataka, the simple things like these are some of the communication skill again, like whatever we learn here and going back and discussing those things with the parents, basically, like how it can really improve the kind of parent the daughter relationship in the kind of the context we are working actually. So that really helps them actually like create an enabling environment at the family context, and then automatically that like continue with the other things like the again like here I think again like which is good, which is not good. I think all the skills are good, but like again, in which context, which works better. For example, like the girls we are working, most of them are from the come from a kind of a marginalized community. Some of them are like a sex worker children. Some of them are a kind of a Devadasi's daughter, predominantly from the SC/ST community. So there are problem associated with like how they are, why they are in that trouble, like why that skills are required for them actually. For example, in this context, like the communication between the daughters and the fathers are not really happening once the girls are attended their puberty, or like once they attend the menarche. Like the father generally don't know like what is really kind of an the girls' problems are basically, and they think that in the kind of a patriarchal community, they think that like the son is the one who will take care of everything, and daughter anyway we don't need to worry much, the mother will take care of that. And then like anyway she'll go to her husband house, we don't need to worry much about some of these things. I think when you are like planning a kind of a life skill education program in this context, we need to be very carefully thought like where really is the problem and like which are the skills will be really helpful. Like instead of thinking of like a 10 different skill, like this is a curriculum we are going to implement it, or like this is a skill we are going to implement it through a kind of school or like some standard system, that is not going to work actually. Again, that will create another set of social norms. Like again, like building this the life skill education may create another set of the layer of problem, or like that may create another set of problem actually. So in this context, I think like working with these girls, like again, negotiation, when you come up with some of these kind of problems, or like when you are in a kind of the violent situation, how you can really negotiate, like how you can negotiate for a kind of a social space, how you can negotiate for a some of your attention from your father, like how you can really get an attention, how you can negotiate with your father that like your education is very important. I think some of these things really work very well in our context, and now we can see some of these girls are really a kind of a role model, and they're going back and changing, like they're going back and discussing some of these things with their parents and in the community. And I think that itself automatically it's a kind of chain again, like there are like 100 girls started doing in these kind of things in the community, the rest of will automatically, that change process will begin, and that will kind of it's a norm change process basically. That's what I think. I don't know, like I'm answering your questions.
Satya, no, you are answering. Of course, you kept stressing upon negotiation skills, especially for girls, from marginalized communities, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Being able to stand up for yourself. For that, you need to have some processes and capacities to handle parental pressures and so on. But is there any other skill apart from negotiation skills that these girls would need in order to be able to stand up to a patriarchal situation?
Definitely, communication is another one. Like, especially in this context, the communication, like a couple of like there are a couple of sessions, like how to really communicate in a different relationship context or in the different societal context. The communication is another skill, definitely will play an important role. Negotiation, communication, yeah, some of these things are very important. Context.
This is a question to both Maithreyi and to Satya, because
Maya, sorry, can I just ask a question before you go to the next one?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so Maithreyi or Satya, I don't know if you could answer this. It's just that we have realized with our little bit of research in this study, as well as our extensive research as a part of SEL, is that very few people mention self-awareness as an important life skill. I'm continuing to use the word life skill for the purpose of this discussion. Yeah. So why do you, I'm just wondering what could be the reason, because we also see it as now doing some bit of literature review, and we also realize what an integral role self-awareness plays. Also that how the rest of the life skills are developed on, through self-awareness. So having said that, we're also wondering why is it that so few people actually mention it as an important life skill? Do you have some thoughts on it?
Satya, shall I go first?
Yeah.
No, I do definitely think self-awareness is absolutely critical. And when I'm talking about self-awareness, to me also this whole question of social identity, your caste, your class, all of that is extremely important. The only reason why I didn't mention it is because first of all, I feel like self-awareness is something that cuts across all the other skills, right? The minute I learn an interpersonal not relation, but like how to be in an interpersonal relation, I'm also learning about myself. Or when I'm learning to communicate, I'm also learning about myself. So in some ways I see, which is why I think the ordering of these skills are also slightly, thinking about them as skills, as individual skills you can work with is slightly problematic to me, because I feel, first of all, they're all interlinked, and some of these are the foundation for everything else. Or like you can't directly get to self-awareness as much as you can get to communication, or as much as you can get to critical thinking or decision making, and all of this informs yourself. So I really don't understand why these skills have been sort of pulled apart as separate. I guess it's because it's easier to teach. Like, how do I teach? How do I tell you I'm teaching you life skills and not have a theme or not have a something to teach? So I think that's why they're probably divided as self-awareness or critical thinking or whatever it is. But to me, self-awareness is part of everything that you will teach as part of your life skills course, right? Like whether you're teaching negotiation, like Satya says, even if you're teaching financial management, that's a lot to do with awareness of your own abilities, to earn, to save, to invest. So I feel like self-awareness is something you'll you have to invariably touch irrespective of what you're teaching.
But it will have to be given specific attention to also, right? As self-awareness per se, wherein they are thinking about their own selves, their strengths, as you said, where are they coming from? And because of where they come from, what is it that they are able to do? What choices do they have? So yeah, because I'm still thinking that probably we still need to pay attention to self-awareness as a pure skill without even bringing the other skills into it.
That's very hard to do according to me. Okay, let's say I design a module only on self-awareness and no other skill, right? Even if I have 15 sessions or I have 20 sessions on self-awareness, does it exhaust the entire understanding of myself? So to me, self-awareness is sort of, I mean, I would rather say reflection is the skill, or reflexivity is the skill that you need to teach, which will enable you to understand yourself constantly, irrespective of what you're engaged in, whether you're engaged in a life skills kind of program or academic learning kind of program, or you're negotiating for some gender caste related norm, or you're negotiating with your boss, or you're handling a subordinate, whatever it is. I feel self-awareness is like I would rather say teach reflexivity, don't teach self-awareness. Because if you say self-awareness and if you say I have 15 modules on self-awareness, there's no way you're going to exhaust the capacities of an individual, the ways in which an individual can
True,
be.
I agree. Okay,
So, yeah.
I agree with that. Okay, that's a good perspective.
What does Satya feel?
Yeah, I agree with Maithreyi's point. I think for me, the self-awareness is like it's an independent skill, but like I feel like it's more like an kind of a cross-cutting skill for all the other skills basically. The self-awareness will be embedded in all the skills. For example, and it's like a kind of an outcome also. Like if you in the whole process of the whole life skill education program, I think the end outcome is like a kind of a self-awareness. Like when you are like teaching them about the whole the negotiation skill, I think the self-awareness is a kind of an integral part of when you're teaching because when like you cannot teach the life skill education in a kind of an the academic kind of teaching, right? Like the life skill education is like a process. Like I learned the life skill negotiation. It is not just like this is the theory, this is what like it says. Like I'll start connecting that with the social the situation where I'm living. I think in that whole process, that kind of the back and forth process, I think the self-awareness is a kind of an integral part of each and every skill actually. So definitely we need to talk about the self-awareness as an independent, the session as a skill, but self-awareness is an integral skill or like an integral aspect we need to bring in every when we are like talking about every skills basically, so that like really they can really contextualize the skill, and that will be more impactful. Like for example, when we are discussing with the marginalized community the kind of life skill education, the whole process of some of these skills are like a communication skill. It is not like communication in a theory will not talk. Communicate the process of the life skill education and the communication is like we will teach about some of the specific skill. They'll go back and discuss or like a practice those things in the community, in their family, in their friends, in their peer group, and then come back how it works, what are the challenges I faced. That the coming back and discussing is a kind of self-awareness, I feel. I think that's where the whole that's what I feel like. It is an outcome, it is also an integral part of each skill.
I think it's interesting how you say it's an outcome also, right?
Yeah.
We are seeing how it is the very, crux of how all life skills are developed. And also we are seeing it as an outcome. I think that's quite an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, thanks, Akila. Actually, that was exactly the question I was going to be asking. So you asked it. Yeah. Thanks, Maithreyi and Satya. I think that gives us a good perspective. You earlier on you talked about life skills vis-a-vis livelihood skills. And a lot of state governments, when we, as part of this life skills collaborative project, many state governments like the government of Rajasthan and I think even in Mizoram and all talked about that they're interested in this life skills collaborative partly because they're interested in promoting employability skills in their youth. or entrepreneurship skills. In fact, the Delhi government also has an entrepreneurship curriculum for grade 11 and 12 standard students. What's your take for both of you in terms of life skills vis-a-vis this employability skills and entrepreneurship skills? Do we need to give specific attention to employability, and entrepreneurship?
So again, I come informed from a sociological reading of these terms, right? So I think
Sure.
we should definitely differentiate between employment, employability, and entrepreneurship. So skills for employment, for example, technical skills, you do need a set of technical skills if you're getting into a specific kind of job, or even say if you had to pick up
Yes.
English language. Those I feel are of course necessary and important for you. But if you look at employability skills, and in fact, there are definitions of employability skills. If you look, across literature, most of them turn the question again, like what I was saying earlier, to the responsibility being for the individual to become employable. And this idea of becoming employable is you be flexible, you be adaptable. So it has nothing to do with technical skills. It doesn't have skills that are per se required for your job, but they are skills that, in fact, again, life skills itself is defined as skills for positive and adaptive behavior, right? Employability is similarly defined as skills that make you more adaptable to your work situation, irrespective of what work situation you are. So again, I find it very problematic, because then it's easy to shift this discourse from employment to employability, right? You can say our youth are not employed because they don't have the right sets of skills, which is what you constantly keep hearing. You're not talking about the fact that there aren't jobs, or you're not talking about the fact that there are jobs which are mostly in the low ends of the service sector, which are temporary, precarious, which are extremely extractive on youth. In fact, yesterday, for example, when we ordered food home, I saw this young boy who has come on a cycle, because obviously like the Swiggy and Zomato kind of platforms are sort of subsidizing the cost through the worker, right? The subsidy that I get is being put onto that
At
worker,
the cost
right?
of the worker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this worker, it has come in rain. I don't know if he can afford a raincoat, can't afford a raincoat, whatever it is, but he doesn't have that choice, right? If he has to be employable, he has to be flexible to the demands of the customer and the employer. So it's very problematic to me. These employability skills are extremely, and along with that, entrepreneurship. I mean, this entire national skill development policy and
Yes.
entrepreneurship. I also conducted a set of research on the skill policies and the vocational courses in government schools. And in fact, there are reports that I'm happy to share with you. There's a paper that I've written on it as well. But the entire, again, this whole entrepreneurship skills becomes about how can you become enterprising? How can you, irrespective of what your social context is, your position is, what you're negotiating back at home, whether you're in a precarious condition, how can you become an entrepreneur? So this Atmanirbhar India, which I find extremely problematic. I'm not for employability, entrepreneurship skills at all. I'd rather say you need, I mean, so if you did your education well, you did not focus just on academic content, right? Many of these skills, like how do I work in a team? Nobody taught me. I never went through a life skills course, but I am able to work in a team, right? Or, okay, there are certain demands by my employer, but at the same time, I also am aware of how much my employer can extract out of me. I'm willing to give some, and I expect my employer to give me back some. So these skills have come to me. It's not, I've not gone through some separate course to learn any of this, right? It's again, like I said, these processes, if they are emphasized from your childhood, through your education, through your socialization process, you don't need separate employability skills, entrepreneurship skills, life skills. So yeah, I mean, employment, technical skills, I understand. Of course, you need to gain technical proficiency. But these others, I just find problematic.
I think that's a refreshing take, because otherwise these are all bandied about words. But Satya, what do you feel?
Yeah, I think uh, looking into the life skill from the employment or like an employability point of view is little problematic. Definitely, I do agree with that. And I think like, and also uh, in my opinion, I don't know whether the uh, I think the if you implement the whole life skill education programs in the name of employment opportunity, creating an employment opportunity or like creating an avenue for the employment, I think that will have a problem actually. And most of the program are failed if they look into the life skill education model from that lens. Like if that is the case, like all the engineering student, like they're all technically very good, and like then like when why they end up with like not just engineering, like all the so-called like a formal education completed the student also like end up with why they end up with so many psychological problems, why we are facing all the suicidal tendency and other things in the community. I think we need to differentiate that actually. The life skill is something definitely if you teach the certain level, like life skill education has a kind of an association with the employability. So basically you need to for example in the context we are working, so important to empower them through the life skill education thing. Like you will create a self-awareness, you'll create a kind of agency among them, confidence among them, self-awareness among them. And then I think end of the day you need to connect that with the employability. That is also very important. Otherwise you teach all these things and like you stop somewhere, I don't know nothing about the, that is maybe the end. Like you need to connect that, like that there is a pathway for that actually, but should not look into the whole life skill education from the employability point of view. I think that's a very limited view. I'll tell you, like sometimes back, we, Maithreyi and me and some of us, like we visited one of the government, the ministry, about talking about the life skill education program for the marginalized community. They were asking the typical question: tell me what are the kind of training you are giving? Candle making ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ಅಥವಾ ಬಟ್ಟೆ ಹೊಲಿಯೋದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ನೀವು? ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನರ ನೀವು ಅವರಿಗೆ ಇದಲ್ಲ ಈ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ 3 ವರ್ಷ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನರಿಗೆ ನೀವು ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಮೇಕ್ ಶೋರ್ ದೇ ವಿಲ್ ಗೆಟ್ ದ ಜಾಬ್ ಆಪರ್ಚುನಿಟಿ? ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ connect ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ? I think the whole perspective of like another school of thought, like from the especially the typical government, like the point of view, life skill is like end of the day they should get some the job opportunity. If you start looking into that lens, if you start the whole life skill education module, or if you implement the life skill education in any of the forum, I think that will end up with a kind of nothing actually. So life skill education is something like beyond that. I think that will have a kind of a connection at the end with the we need to look into that, but not to just see from only from the employability lens. That will have a kind of a major problem, and that's the reason like some of the life skill education programs are failing in the current.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. And I think you now alluded to the whole thing of mental health. And I think that's my next question in terms of the,
Maya,
especially now.
before you go into
Yes,
that, can
please.
I ask a
Sure,
question?
Swati. Yeah, Swati.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to, so you both, like you, both of you have spoken about how a certain context allows or doesn't allow the skill to a skill to be a life skill to be expressed, and then you also spoke about how, like for example, the girls who learn how to communicate better can speak to their families and then kind of improve their situations. But on the other hand, you have said that with when it comes to employability, we shouldn't be putting the whole onus on the child, as in like on the individual, that they should have all these skills which will then make them employed better for employment in the future. So on one hand, we are you are expressing like certain things should be uh, like the change in the mindset should be done from the child, as in like the child can push that forward. And on the other hand, you're also talking about how with employment, maybe the child, it's not the responsibility of the child to go into that. So my question is about like what is your view upon what's the balance between like how much a life skill can be one individual's um, like a responsibility, or how much it should be inculcated in one person versus what are the things which should be the we should be looking at as a whole society change. Or so basically, when we are doing life skills education, it's for an individual, but then maybe certain things you think are not for life skills education, but for like the societal change, and should not be targeted to a certain, like a particular person. I don't know if I'm coming across very clear with my question, but I hope, I hope you can get a little bit of it. Uh, yeah.
So let me try to answer your question. I think there were two questions in your question. Just to take the second part of it, where you're saying how much of it should target the individual, how much should it target social change. I'm actually going to let Satya answer that question, because that's exactly what KHPT does. I feel one of the reasons why the KHPT program is definitely a much better life skills education program is because we are not looking at individual change alone. We're looking at individual change in the context of social change, and how do you enable social change. So maybe Satya can speak about it a little more. But to go back to an earlier question, so I don't think, at least I was not trying to say that children should not be, I mean, I wouldn't use the word responsible, but say children should not be developed to prepare for other roles, right? Your future role in education or in work or in families or whatever it is. The only thing I'm trying to argue for is that some of these things are part of our everyday context. Every day we do have to learn, either like every day we do have to use communication skills, right? So it's not an either or situation. It's just that in certain spaces, a certain form of communication is privileged. In certain other spaces, certain other forms of communication is privileged. So if you are in a authoritarian patriarchal family, questioning is not the communication skill that is privileged at all. Negotiation is not the communication skill that is privileged at all. But say if you are in a workplace, again in a workplace, if you are in a supervisory role, then your questioning and your negotiation skills are privileged. But if you are not in a supervisory role, you are in a subordinate role, again these are skills that are not privileged. So the point is then, when you say employability, or when you say entrepreneurial skills, you are targeting very specific forms of communication skills. So again, like during my PhD, what I did was analyzed these life skills curricula of organizations, and I started looking at, okay, if you're teaching a module on communication, what are you teaching? And most often a module on communication was listening skills, was taking instruction skills. So basically then you are narrowing, you don't mean to teach communication. What you mean to teach is, again, how do you make this person adaptable, flexible, so that she will fit into an employer's vision of what his or her employee should be. No negotiation skills. So if your employer pays you late, or your employer's paying you poorly, they don't want you to unionize, right? Especially private sector does not want you to unionize. And the kinds of programs that are being targeted usually at government schools, at children coming from lower socioeconomic situations, they're all going to be prepared for these kinds of jobs at the lowest end of the service economy, right? So you don't want your Swiggy employees to start questioning and saying, why are you subsidizing costs through us? Why are you giving us, precarious working conditions? Why are you not following labor laws? You don't want your Swiggy employees to do that, right? So that is my point. My problem is because employability skills means a very specific set of skills, just as life skills means a very specific set of skills. So again, to go back to Akila's question, self-awareness. Again, if you analyze self-awareness modules across different organizations, you'll see self-awareness is defined very specifically as your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities. So where is your location to improve? Not your identity of caste, gender, not your identity of a child. Definitely, there is no child in it at all. There's no well-being. There is no understanding that childhood might include other aspects such as play, nothing. So there are very narrow definitions of what these skill programs are about. And that is where I have an issue. And what I was trying to suggest is that in any case, so I went to a sort of slightly better private school, right? So any case, as part of my curriculum, I had lots of extracurricular activities, whether it was debating, whether it was like, other competitions, writing competitions, and my formal education anyway was teaching me the formal skills I required for my work. So today, if I have to write a formal letter, I gained it at school. Today, if I have to speak like this, I gained it at school because public speaking was part of my curriculum, right? So these are anyway things that are there as part of your everyday context. Just whether these opportunities are enabled for you or not is the question, depending on who you are. So that's the difference I was trying to make.
Satya, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Swati. I think raising an important question. I think introspecting about like the employability and like life skill education, whether the life skill education will lead into a kind of an employability. I think this kind of introspection is very important. And I think without this, like if you do the kind of a life skill education again, that's kind of an incomplete, I think. And I think like and also if you go with the notion that like life skill education will lead into a kind of better employability or like a giving like more employability to people, I think that's also a kind of problem. Like in most of the scenario, like we saw that like whatever the parents they do now, they don't want their children to do the same thing actually. Like agricultural family, like we work in a kind of a predominantly in agriculture, rural context.
Yeah.
None of the parents, they don't want, no, I don't want my daughter or son to be kind of continue here. Like we have struggled, it's enough. Like we don't want that actually. And again, like there are women like who weave a kind of very beautiful saris. Sari weaving is a very kind of profession in some of the region, they're coupled in that region. So they don't want, like we don't want that to be continue as a profession.
They don't want to do weaving.
They don't want their children to take that as a profession actually. But like again, like if you go with the notion that I will go and implement a life skill program, and then end of the day, all these girls will continue their kind of an education and like continue their master degree and have some software job. Are we interested in that? Or like, I think the whole life intention of the life skill is like end of the day that Akila pointed out, that self-awareness. You have to decide like what suits best for you actually. Like there are examples now, like girls are like thinking like, why can't I do something like within the sari, there are opportunities. Not just a sari, I can also make a chudidar, salwar, and I can sell it and I can make a business out of it. I can make a very good life out of it actually. I think that like that acceptance, that self-thinking, reflectivity, if that started coming through this kind of thing, and then the kind of an employability and other thing will automatically come in. Like there are like we've seen that like why should I go and out of my town and I only look for the job? There are opportunity within that actually. Why can't I look into that? I think that even the life skill can also address those stereotyping thinking in the society, and like they can choose whatever best suits to them actually. I think we should have that openness when we are thinking that kind of curriculum as part of life skill education.
Thanks, Satya. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Swati, for that question also. My next question was connected with mental health, because especially keeping in mind COVID, the pandemic, but even otherwise, there's an increasing incidence of mental health issues amongst young people in our country. A lot of the times it's not even addressed or even considered because it's not visible. What are your views on that, especially linked to life skills and life skills education?
So yeah, I do agree. There's a increase in the burden of mental health that we're facing, along with this challenge of not having actually adequate mental health trained staff, right? So that's a huge struggle for us. And I do think like a lot of this is coming from these issues of identity, these issues of sudden cultural change, transformation, technology. And I think life skills in this context is very important, or again those processes of being able to reflect, to think through, to understand what you're dealing with, to understand, especially to understand, for example, what is the difference between a virtual relation and a real relation that you have. So these kinds of things definitely, I think, are affecting youth, and we do need some ways to address it. And I definitely think a package like life skills is well suited for it. Again, I feel, in terms of, I mean, if this package is not implemented with this understanding that you have to address social context, I think it will still fail. I think, again, what will happen is you'll only burden the child more. Again, it will become this model of, cope. How do I cope? I mean, if I don't have the resources to cope, or if I'm fundamental issues that are bothering me, like, stigma is bothering me, especially say in this COVID context, how do I cope? How again, I feel the danger of such programs is you can always turn this back and say, you do a better job of coping, you do a better job of getting resilient, without addressing the other factors that contribute to this situation. And that's why I think, like, I just want to complete that point about KHPT's program, not just targeting the individual, but targeting the social. So along with something like a life skills session, like Satya was mentioning briefly earlier, they do something called parent-daughter relation communications. They do something called samvadas in the community, where they bring girls, boys, bring girls and their parents, bring girls and other community stakeholders, whether they are village leaders, panchayat leaders, into a conversation. So, it's not just telling the girl, okay, now somehow you cope. I know you're facing all these gender stereotypes and gender norms, and now I'm teaching you to become self-aware, and I'm teaching you that you have a right to protest against child marriage, without addressing the fact that there's a power imbalance here. She cannot just go back home today and say, okay, in class I was taught that you can't get me married before 18, so you can't get me married. At the same time, you need to bring the parent into a dialogue. You need to bring other powerful community stakeholders into a dialogue. In fact, another project that we are running in Bijapur, we found that members of our community advisory board, and these are people working in fields like child protection, these are people working in CBOs on sex worker collectives. We found their attitudes itself to the girls being so sort of regressive, in the sense, like Satya was just talking about this yesterday in another context. So now in this whole context of online learning, these sex worker collective representatives, child protection officer, child protection, committee representatives, they are speaking about things like, oh, when these girls get online, we don't know who they are talking to, whether it's their master or they're talking to someone else. So there is a danger here. So obviously then you can't, child marriage is not just going to go away because I worked with this girl and told her at 18, you can get married, not before that, and there's a law that protects you. Because even the people who are supposed to protect this child in that community have these attitudes, and most child marriages are happening stealthily with the knowledge of these community members, right? So that's that. So my concern with, again, these mental health questions and addressing these mental health questions is, it should not again turn out to be this individualizing process of telling children or adolescents, you need to cope better. That's my concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Satya?
Yeah.
Mental health, particularly amongst girls, marginalized communities, and so on.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and there is definitely a strong association. The life skill education and kind of addressing some of the mental health issues. In fact, before the current program we are doing, the program called Spurti, we are doing with the marginalized community in the Koppal. But before that, we did an intervention in the northern Karnataka. There are two districts, Bagalkot and Bijapur. So in the district, we did an life skill education based intervention with the adolescent girls between the age group of 12 to 16, 17. And the whole program was evaluated using a cluster randomized trial approach. Actually, it was very scientifically, the whole program was evaluated. and KHPT and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, both the organizations come together, and that KHPT implemented the program, and jointly we evaluated the program using a CRCT as a very technical scientific method, using both qualitative and quantitative approaches. And in the study, the outcome also, it was the clearly came out, especially the life skill education, the sessions conducted, like the module implemented, are like not typically the session, like there are other the aspect of the intervention which are also a kind of a life skill education session in nature, has strongly contributed in terms of addressing some of the mental health issues. Not the clinical aspect, we haven't really evaluated the clinical aspect of the mental health, but like the social aspect of the mental health, that include like a kind of an anxiety, depression, and like a better the relationship handling. Some of these things, I think it has really contributed very well actually. So in general also, I think like once this capability, social skill, and like some of these confidence level automatically increases, now automatically that can really, because the mental health issues are caused by some of these aspects actually, the prevailing gender norm, social norm, the girl should behave like this only, like girl should marry at 14, 15 or 16. I think these kind of things are like really causing kind of an distress, mental health related issues among the children we are working, at least in terms of the schooling, like you only boys should go, girls should not go after that, and like you have to be. I think these kind of the environmental factor, the social norms, systems, the belief system, these are really causing the kind of a mental health issue. And I think if you start like empowering, and if you start like preparing them to how they can really cope up with some of these things, that can really calm down the mental health issue. I think there is a strong association in addressing the mental health. I don't know about the kind of a clinical aspect of like the severe mental health issue, that maybe sometime it is not necessarily from the social aspect, but like there are many other factors for the mental health. Again, is a kind of very broad term, but definitely in terms of addressing the social aspect, the life skill education, the life skill models are very helpful, especially when you're working with a kind of a marginalized community, when they are living a life in a kind of a very stressful environment, there are a lot of uncertainty. Someone else is taking decision on behalf of them on everything actually, even the small things. I think this can play a very important role. We have some evidences, and we are also seeing those kind of anecdotes from our like other intervention we are doing in this community. In fact, when we were working, it is not just with adolescent also. In fact, when we were working with female sex worker in Northern Karnataka, especially the Devarasi sex worker, we did a kind of another RCT, especially preparing these women in terms of their like it is not like a life skill education model, but like something similar actually. Like the women coming and sitting in a weekly 2 times discussing, there will be a peer group discussion, they come together, coping mechanism, learning all those things, and how it really reduces the intimate partner violence again. I think some of these techniques have a kind of a strong tool to address the gender-based violence, the mental health related issues. I think it's a very strong technique, and we have some of these evidences from the field. It worked very well in this kind of the community context, basically.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting actually that a lot of mental health issues, especially amongst marginalized communities, may not be because something they have a specific predisposition towards it, but it's also socially created.
Yes.
Because of the social context and the constraints and the limitations and the marginalization they experience socially.
Yeah, because I'll give you a couple of examples. Like a girl, okay, around the 8th standard, 9th standard, high school going girl. She's from a marginalized community. She maybe her mother is a sex worker, or there was a woman. She may be coming from a very poor socio-economic background. For example, like if you see her like the daily life of this girl, like in fact we conducted a study using a lifeline case study approach, like how their life, the daily life of these girls actually. So if you see, like generally at this age, the girls are like, the kids will like they'll enjoy, right? Like their life, like small things actually. But if you see this kind of thing, the girl will get up 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, and then she like lot of household related work she has to complete until like 8 o'clock or like, and including preparing a food and everything. And then like she'll prepare school and she has to walk. Sometimes she has to go by walk. Like the general high schools are in the other villages. By the
Yeah.
time like she's going reaching school, if it is 10 o'clock school, if she reach 10:30, nobody will understand like why she's coming. Like she don't know anybody. Nobody knows that she up. She's getting up at 5 o'clock, completing all the household work, and father is like beating and scolding her. Mother like least bothered about her listening because she's already in the trouble. And like going there, and again like this, the teacher will beat like again like, and like why you are late, like you're this is like you are not interested in the school, but that is not the situation. Actually there are many other factors. And again like comparing with the like this girl, like you are dumb, like see other girl, she's coming here, she's studying well, that kind of comparison, the mindset of the teacher also. I think all these things definitely cause a lot of mental stress, especially this kind of the context actually. Imagine like in that context, like whatever the academic activities, that doesn't matter actually. If you like we have seen that like the lifeline case study approach of the girls, we saw that like some of them they have undergone these kind of things actually. Small things help them. Like how can I manage my time? Like for example, I'll get up in the 5 o'clock and then like I'll go to school. In the meantime, how can I negotiate small things with my parents? Can I ask my mother to? My brother is there. Can he take care of some of those things? So okay, I'll wash the vessel. Like if the brother take care of some of things, I can like save some of my time and I'll reach school little early. I think that kind of these small things really help the girl. And then if the school, the teacher started blaming, like you're black or you are like you're dumb, you're not able to read and write. If she okay, I'm not good in this, but I sing very well actually. I have another skill to express. If that kind of started, if the girl started expressing vocal about those things, that will automatically boost her the kind of an confidence level. I think that again like reduces her like other ability. I think we have some of those quotes from the girls, the case studies from the girls, like how I once I became a part of some of this intervention exposure, how my life changed actually. And the change is not like an again an outcome, like I become now master degree holder, I become not not like that. Very chota small things, but for her I think that matters a lot. I think that's what ultimately we can do actually through the life skill education session. I think that's a whole intent also, not really expecting them to get an employment, but at least when she, by the time she completed her 10th standard, but like how peacefully or like how confidently, how she managed the whole things with their peer group, I think that matters a lot. I think in that context, definitely life skill session is a very important contributor, addressing some of the very sensitive and very small things, but it has a very strong impact on all those things.
Thank you for that, Maithreyi and Satya. I think that was very useful for us. I have the last penultimate question. You know, young people are supposed to, there's an increasing need for them to be civic, engage themselves in a civic sense, and be more socially aware, look at citizenship, be contributing citizens of the country and so on. What are your views about this connected with life skills?
Again, I think it's definitely important. And again, I think it should be part of your everyday process. Like, again, I don't think you should have a separate sort of social engagement, civic engagement kind of program. I think if you develop into being reflective, reflexive citizens, you already have some of this, right? Again, I go back to the fact that I never went through a separate civic participation course, but I question, I think about my role as a civic, citizen. I think about, say, for example, when I vote, how do I make this choice? Why do I make this choice? But so I feel like these are not things that you need to target separately. I think it's just that we don't give it enough importance when it comes to children. Like whoever asks a child, do you want to elect a leader? Do you want to choose your leader? Do you, what are the characteristics of a leader? And that's something, again, I think this program that Satya is talking about, Spurti, has tried to do in a very different way. Like they have this question they enter field with before they start the program.
What is the name of the program? What's it called?
Spurti.
Spurti. Okay,
Yeah.
Spurti. Yeah.
So they start with this question of asking girls, who would your role model be? And it's very interesting because there are like multiple responses, right? From Abdul Kalam to what they see the most.
Or something.
Yeah. And to what they see most in their village context. So like they see a teacher. So immediately they say teachers are helping so many children. I also want to be a teacher. So, but then when you push further and try to ask them what are the characteristics of a role model, and the people they are naming may not actually have those characteristics, they are able to actually talk about again, people who are empathetic, who would understand, who would not discriminate. Their school teacher might actually be discriminating. So the thing
Very
is, I
true.
think we don't give this space, or we don't create the space where they can actually talk about what role do they want to participate in social change. And again, I think Satya will talk much more about this, but to me, what has been the most heartening about the Spurti program, and I talk about it as though I'm not part of it now, I am, but a lot of credit goes to Satya and the team before, because I've just joined a year back. What is the most heartening to me about this program is that it's managed to achieve the kind of social participation, civic participation that you're saying, which were not even targets of the life skills program at all. The target of the life skills program was very simply to keep girls in school, to improve their nutrition levels, to prevent child marriage. So the logic was, if children continue in school, they complete their 10th, we kind of are able to push them to continue education, child marriage will come down. Their nutrition levels will improve, because early child marriages also affect their nutrition. So it was a very sort of simple, how do I put it? Not, I mean, almost instrumental in some ways, right? You target this and you'll get this outcome. And what happened during this COVID time, actually during the first lockdown phase, which I was completely blown by, was the fact that there were girls organizing by themselves. Not the project staff had nothing to do with this. Girls organizing by themselves, because they realized that obviously a lot of community members have lost jobs, right? So they started interacting with our field team and started saying, okay, now what do we do in this situation? People don't have jobs. So then our community workers just mentioned, saying there is this MNREGA scheme. The girls started reading about the MNREGA scheme, how to apply for it, what to do. And you will not believe it, 2 young girls organized an entire set of 100 workers. They went to the panchayat, they filled out forms, they said, we are due for an MNREGA project in our village, because again, at the panchayat level, this is all political, there's a middleman. They have actually gone and negotiated with a Meiti, middleman called, they're called Meitis, negotiated with him and said, no, we are due for a project, you have to give us a project for our village. So these girls are not getting anything out of this, they are organizing their community. Then they had challenges of transport to take these people. They have organized, they have collected money. They have organized for a auto. They have taken people. These are men. These are adolescent girls organizing a group of men to go for a job.
With men.
And they've managed to get, their communities have earned, during that really hard time, people have earned 4,000, 5,000 rupees, which is a big deal. So, and
Wow.
to me, it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable that a set of girls have done this, when just a year, not a year, maybe 3 or 4 years back, these girls would have actually got married off at 14, 15 and gone away from them.
How old were these girls, these 2 girls?
I think they were around 17, 18. They were all in first PUC, second.
Great. Yeah.
And the panchayat officials, actually, we have recorded interviews where they're saying we've never seen a woman, let alone a girl, in the panchayat. This is the first time we're seeing girls come to a panchayat and say, this is due to our community, you have to give it to us. So
And they didn't face ridicule.
They did. These girls interviews, they speak about it. They say, when we used to pass the panchayat office, men or boys around would say, what are you doing here? You should be in your husband's house. Why are you here? They would be teased. but they are like, we didn't care, we had to get these jobs, we thought we had to do this, and we did it. So
Wow.
another girl, she's still studying, she's again, I think in first PUC. Sanitary napkins stopped during the COVID time, right, because schools closed and stuff. She wrote to so there is a local activist in Koppal who produces sanitary pads. So she wrote to her, she wrote to the district collector and said, you can't, like, girls are suffering in the village, get us sanitary pads. And this has gone up to the state level. The Minister for Women and Child contacted her and said, we will make sure. And she has visited Koppal, she has met this girl. Just, I mean, so these are not things we imagined the program would do at all. And these girls have the capacity, are able to do it, are willing to do it, and in fact want to do it further. Maybe Satya will talk about the concept we are trying to work on right now. So to me, it like life skills, of course, has a lot that it can do in terms of enabling this kind of participation, right? But I still feel you don't have to target it as a separate objective. I still feel if you develop individuals to be critical, you will develop individuals to be reflective, reflexive, you will get it. You will get this kind of participation.
Yeah, before I move on to Satya, I just want you, because you've been using words reflective and reflexive sort of constantly. So I just want you to tell, share, how do you see these as different?
Yeah, so again, very sociologically.
That's why I'm very keen to understand. Yeah.
So reflective in the sense that I think to some extent we all do this, right? We kind of attend to what's going on within our context. We try to think about why something has happened, not happened, whatever. I think reflexive, because I feel it's also important to contextualize yourself in this process. I think it's much easier to say, okay, caste issues exist, but it's more difficult to say, I am located within this caste field in this kind of a position. I either have power, don't have power vis-a-vis it. I can negotiate it, can't negotiate it. This will allow me to negotiate it, not negotiate it. So I think being reflexive is also about putting yourself into this moment of reflection and seeing where you are located. And that I feel is very important. So when we talk about critical thinking, I feel usually we are doing this reflection, right? We reflect on these issues of caste, these issues of gender, or whatever else. But very rarely do you position yourself into this context. And even if it means calling yourself out, like calling myself out, that I am part of that system which contributes to service economy workers like Swiggy being exploited. Where do we do that? We don't do that. And I feel that is extremely important for a life skills program. So just to go back to that question that you were asking about, do we need to add any skills? This is what I would say. I'd say reflexivity is something we really need to add.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a very clear and great distinction you've made. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're coming to look at caste-based aspects and all that, because a lot of times we are ourselves responsible, or the specific historical caste that we belong to may be responsible for the prejudices that we perpetuate, or the constraints and the problems that we face, depending on your birth, in a sense. So Satya, what do you feel?
So I think the adolescent youth are like a very potential group. Like we always think that like we work for them, we are there for them, but that is not true. Like what of example Maithreyi has given, like the COVID situation, many of these girls and youth have done a kind of incredible job actually. Like we always think that like they need support, like, but they also have, there's a very powerful the group actually, but like we are not really utilizing that resources in a proper way. I think that's the kind of the gap. And I think that's the reason I also mentioned in the first question. For me, the life skill education, the word comes to me is like an empowerment. Like if you really empower them in this way, definitely this group can kind of like play a very great role, because they like the group we are working at in Koppal, like around 4,000 adolescent girls from the 51 villages.
4,000.
Yeah, 4,000
Wow.
girls from the 51 villages. We consider them as a role model girl, actually.
Wow.
We can separately, I don't know, like we have time, like we can discuss about the
I'd
program.
love to learn more about all the work that you're doing separately,
Yeah,
definitely,
definitely
because
do
I
that.
think seems to be really phenomenal.
But I think like the previously we mentioned of the word like a self awareness, the compassion. I think that's the beauty of the life skill education module. Like we have an opportunity to bring this all the group, and like a group learning, like collective learning is one of the kind of an aspect in the life skill education module. At least we are the one we are implementing. That really creates, that enables this community to kind of like without any instruction or anything, or like to convince someone. They don't do that, actually. They'll do something like a very voluntary basis, actually. So for example, like in these villages, the casteism and caste class situation is so vibrant now. The village context we work, there are OBC girls, are there are SC ST girls are there, but like we never had a kind of a problem from like within this group, at least. Like for example, if you go to a village, there are 2-3 temple. One temple like that everyone can go. Like that is the situation in the SC community. But there are other 2-3 temple. Like definitely these girls cannot not allowed in that temple. That's still an issue, actually. But at least these girls group are like at least sensitive. Okay, in this group session, if you are going and conducting there, we cannot like all cannot go in that temple. Can we do it in somewhere else, that like without hurting the other's emotion? And they don't have that kind of really, that at least at this age they don't have that kind of, you are from this caste, I'm from this caste, like that dynamics we are not seeing, at least this age, actually, this environment. I think that's the beauty. This age itself is a kind of an this thing. Like I think once we started growing and growing, automatically we all corrupt. Actually, I think like in the the thinking, at least. I think that age is a wonderful age. I think if you can bring this opportunity, the collective learning, this reflection, this compassion and self-awareness, if you all like bring in there, I think that can really make a lot of differences. The volunteer, they can really play a role. In fact, when the Kodagu, this one like last time happened, these girls did a kind of ₹1 campaign, actually. So what they did is simple. Like they roamed around entire villages.
The floods,
and asked
you mean the floods?
each and everyone. Floods, yeah, flood time. So they went there and asking like, give me ₹1. That's it. I don't want much more money. All the girls going and like meeting ₹1 campaign, they call it. And they collected 50,000 rupees and they handed over that money to the district collector of Koppal, and it reached to
wow.
So these are all like I think that's the reason. I think like what we strongly believe is life skill education is not kind of a very, again, like it should not be another academic process. Actually, you have seen like the life skill education session conducting in the school, like all the girls should call their classmates Anna, because friend anta karbitre relationship yellow develop agbidutte, and like there is some problem. So that's how the life skills are taught there, actually. I think that is again like creating, there are like there are like, they are already living with kind of a lot of problem. So when we are going and doing another life skill education problem, we should not create one more layer of problem. I think that we need to be very clear when we are implementing this kind of program with this community. And secondly, the life skill education, I think in the whole process is what we believe and what we learned also basically from the community. We will go with session. I think that, for example, the communication or like the session and the compassion are like a self-awareness. I think the facilitator will go with that session. Like we have a kind of an content, but when you facilitate, I think that the interaction, discussion, that will enrich the whole session, and you will learn a lot from there, actually, instead of like you are teaching them. Actually, you need to create that environment.
That's right.
I think that kind of flexibility should be there in the life skill education, and that can really create a kind of a local leaders. They can really participate in this kind of civic society action, taken question some of these things, actually. So we cannot create a leader by definition, like leader should be like this and like do this kind of work. I think that's what already society is created, like the caste related leaders, class related leaders, like so many leaders are there. If you really want to bring down those kind of a plain, like a pure hearted, that compassion leader in the community, that may be anyone, like the child or elder or the mother or anybody. I think this kind of the interaction intervention will really help to create a kind of a very natural reader. They can do something for their own like self-satisfaction, not to get a kind of an attention always. Actually, the girls who contributed for the Kodugu relief are like the girls who helped in the NREG scheme, like got like employment opportunity for the 100. They never like taught or they never discussed any of these things. Actually, we came to know after some time later. Okay, then we went and like we had a discussion, recorded some of those things, but they never bothered actually. Like they never expected this kind of an things. Actually, they naturally like I come from this family. I know how much like my father and mother, they went to Goa last time. They came back. How much they struggled they had here actually when they lost job and came back. And my uncle went to Bangalore. They stayed there. I went with my mother and father. I stayed in a street in Bangalore when they were going for the construction work. How difficult life we felt, and when they come back like with the limited money, what are the difficulty I faced, my family faced. I think the same thing will happen to all others. Now they are all coming back to their home in this difficult situation. I know something. I know I am able to read and write. I can fill some form actually, the energy form. What I can simply do is taking them, fill the job card, and ask some of these things. You do the Panchayat Karyadarshi, you do or like a PDO do this thing. That's it. Like I'm going with a group of people, I'm facilitating this. I'm not a leader here. I'm just going with. I think that kind of a natural things are coming out from this thing. I think that's a beauty actually. That's some of the learning, and that's the learning for us also. I think you don't need to make a kind of a very big thing to implement a life skill education thing. You go with the kind of community, what they think, what they. You don't need a kind of a very standardized or like scientifically tested curriculum, all those things. Like you just go with the community learning and bring some of these things and discuss with the community. I think that's where a lot of learning will come, and that learning is kind of a life skill education. I think that's what we are all learning actually. I think that's the reason like maybe for me, like that's the reason I think it's very difficult for me to technically or like academically speaking about life skill education is very difficult for me. Like I can speak from the community point of view, what is really life skill education and what worked in the community we work actually.
Thank you. I have my last question, and I think it sort of leads up this because it's talking about community and so on. I think in India we are such a sort of a divisive sort of society in terms of gender or religion or caste or class, social class, sometimes even race, especially if you're looking at tribal people and so on. How do you feel, maybe you've answered this question in all the earlier responses, but I need to ask this, so I'm asking it so that in case there's something else you want to say. Do you think imparting life skills could make our young people more inclusive?
So Satya spoke about self-awareness as outcome, right? Like I want to talk about life skills as method. If you think about life skills as method, in fact, that's how I started my PhD actually. Yes. I wanted to think about life skills as a method to achieve whatever. So when you talk about caste or gender or even economic exploitation, any forms of these exploitations, I feel as a method, life skills can be very powerful, just like what Satya was saying, not just simply enabling people to question or simply enabling people to feel more confident about themselves, or simply in our program, for example, the Spurti program, I think what works the best is the fact that girls can come together. That's it. Otherwise, within the context of a village, like Satya was describing, because of caste or because of gender or because of all of these oppressive social norms, girls, other than meeting each other at school, cannot be seen anywhere in the community. So I think the program just simply allowed the girls to come together, and just the fact that girls came together and started talking gave them this whole sort of, I mean, not ability, but it opened up this opportunity for them to do so much more, whether it was question people back at home or question people in the village, or think through their own lives differently. They were hearing from other girls. So I feel like that life skills can create that kind of platform. The fact that you bring 10 or 15 girls together or boys together and say, okay, now let's just sit together and talk. And when you're talking, obviously, like on certain sessions, you're trying to emphasize a certain way of thinking, or you're emphasizing a certain way of feeling, or you're emphasizing a certain way of connecting with each other. And to me, that's what life skills does. And therefore, I do feel that as a method, it can be really powerful in addressing caste, class, gender, religion. And yeah, so I'd say definitely it has a lot of power.
Satya, what do you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very, very strong tool to make that inclusiveness to address that issue of inclusiveness. I think it is like we have like many examples, and like we have seen that like the girls like accessing the social space is a bigger issue actually, and that lead into a kind of many other problems. So I think this has really helped in that kind of issue, and not necessarily in the kind of the rural context, in the marginalized community context. I think in our home also, I think like if you are really like undergone some of these things now, like you'll be very very cautious and self-aware about these things, and then automatically you'll consider what your children are speaking, or like being a father, like you'll I think start listening. Like I think for me, like I listen my daughter, like what she says. I think that's important actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very like I think in that way, like this the tool is, this is a very powerful tool to bring address of those issues.
Incidentally, how old is your daughter?
She's now like the 11. She's completing 12.
Okay.
Like she's
So that's that she's entering adolescence. Yeah, she's entering adolescence. Yeah, very true. Yeah. Thank you. I think this has been a very illuminating, dual interview, so to speak. I've found it very, very enriching. I just have one question, which was not part of our list of questions. In terms of, because as part of the Life Skills Collaborative, we, not us, but other organizations are looking at assessment of life skills. What's your thought and take on assessing life skills? Because since both of you have been constantly talking about, Maithreyi, you talk about life skills as a process, life skills as a method, and so on. So what's your take on assessment of life skills?
So I mean, as far as I understand and the literature I've gone through, the organizations I've worked with, I feel it's very hard to assess it in a very conventional format. I know there are life skills questionnaires. I know Young Lives has come up with a life skills scale. Some of the organizations that I worked with psychologists abroad to create the scale. But I really think that's not the way you can measure these things. I think the indicator of, like, because they are processes, I think the indicators are also understanding the process of change, right? So one thing that works very well for us at KHPT is, like Satya was saying, we never even knew about these girls having gone for, getting this employment or that Kodagu fund or whatever. What has been happening is we've just been documenting and documenting and document. So we have somebody called a documentation officer, and all she does is document. So, I feel that is, if you really want to measure and you really want to know if there is some change, it has to be qualitative. I don't think you can measure it on scale. So I know people are trying to use self-esteem scales. So this was a question I was asked actually during my PhD. So a lot of these, professors who would come from the natural sciences or would come from more sort of behavioral sciences, right, would ask me, how do you know? So if self-esteem goes up, at the end of the day, if you measure pre and post and self-esteem has gone up, and how do you know if it is your program or if it's something else in the community or in the environment? And I think some of those challenges we had at Spurti when they were using the quantitative sort of data collection process, they also realized there's so much of secular change that has happened, right? So policies have changed, governments have changed, governments have new policies. So how do you then attribute it to your program? And I think it's very hard to measure it in that conventional form. I think what you can measure are more qualitative narrative accounts of what's happening, whether there has been improvements in an individual girl's status. Again, the problem I feel is also we think about improvement or change in very specific ways, right? So if improvement to me always will be children going to school. Improvement will never be that this girl might have chosen and said, a school is a worse off option for me compared to something else, some vocational course I'm going to, or some tailoring that I'm doing. I'm making these choices in a structural context. And to me, this choice is much more healthy than going to school. So, but that will not be your indicator. I used to have the same arguments with all the life skills organizations that I worked with during my PhD. And I used to say, if you have a set indicator, how do you really know if there's change happening? If I have made a decision very consciously, taking in whatever you have taught me, draw my decision tree, etc., etc., and I realize actually going to school doesn't work for me, will you be happy? Will you accept this result? And nobody has an answer to that, right? So I feel quantitatively it's very hard to capture.
Yeah. So did you have any take on this?
Yeah, I think, the assessing the life skill education is quite tricky actually. And if you just like a very quantitatively assess, I think it's very practically, it's very difficult. One is like, I think we should use qualitative or the mixed method approach, maybe the best way to think about the evaluation. And also it takes generally the time, like a longitudinal studies should be very helpful, like a kind of cohort studies or longitudinal study. I remember like what we did one like a study called lifeline case study approach. It's a pure qualitative in nature. What we did was basically we recruited about 30 girls when they joined. Like it was a 3-year intervention period, and the life skill education was conducted for almost 1.5 year time actually. Like 1 year, like almost for the with the first set of girls, and again they were trained for the other girls. We tried that in both Spurti and the Samatha, the previous intervention. So what we did was like we recruited them in the year 130 girls, and we started, for example, in the month of January, we recruited the girls. And then again, like after 1 year, we again went them and met again, like having a discussion. That's a kind of a mid kind of an inquiry. And the approach was more like a qualitative and very participatory in nature, and the questions are very carefully thought, and using a kind of an lifeline, like basically the very participatory nature. For example, what we tried was there are like a chart, the 3 line, like because these are like a very participatory. So 3 line, like there are one red line, blue line, and green line. So red line indicate like red is blood, like these are our the family and like family members and all. Okay, and then blue is my school uniform, like my friends and all. Like that, like green is a kind of a community. So understanding like how the kind of a life skill education, like whatever learning, I interact with some of these kind of 3 different stakeholders in my closer network. Like for example, starting from the like I undergone in the last 1 year, like January to this January, and periodically going like in the month of January, what happened, like how, like okay, I at that time I was 12 year, I started high school, and then like I attend menarche, and these kind of problems started coming, and then I joined the life skill education session, and I like learned some of these things, and small incidents they were explaining, like after some time, like boys teased me, and I was like really going like this, and after that, like sometime I responded him back actually, and I gave him back, like I took for the help. So these are all like a small incidents they started giving and constructing a story about like how the whole process went on actually. And that gives a kind of a very strong evidences where really it works. Like it is not that life skill education we conducted, it works everywhere and it solves the problem. It works in some context. Maybe like it may be work immediately very well with the external community, but within the community, like life skill education I'm undergoing, and immediate problem is like going back and responding to the family member is very difficult, because life skill education will start empowering you in the beginning. Like it teaches you all the questioning the parents. And you can question outsiders, you cannot question the insider. Questioning the insider is very challenging. Coming back from the life skill education session, starting questioning the father, something went wrong with this girl, like someone has like brainwashed her, I think I need to be very careful now.
Yeah.
Then you need to involve the parents. I think the whole process of life, like doing the life skill education and implement, like bringing the evaluation of the life skill education should be a kind of a very parallel system. We should not like be like I have done implemented the life skill education session, and I want to prove that like this is a good model. If you do in that intention, if you do it in that way, then the outcome may be something, but not that really not give a kind of a very contextualized information. Where it went well, where it went wrong, where really the course correction can be done, and where really it is working in our community. For example, we are doing this in the rural marginalized community. There may be though the life skill education is the one component, maybe within that the course corrections are very important. Okay, we should start session this first and then bring this session, communication first, and then the other the self-awareness or the leadership, are like which one need to bring in first actually. So along with working with the girls, sometimes we also need to work with the parents. Like, okay, life skill education session started. That is even like we are shown in the intimate partner also, violence also. Like we started like developing their self-esteem, confidence. The immediate thing is increased violence reporting actually, because they are empowered. I think that will happen generally with this the vulnerable community, or like any life skill education module. It also intend to empower them, like creating kind of a questioning attitude. Once you start that, they're all more vulnerable actually. They are already vulnerable, and then going back and parents beating.
Which is the community you mentioned? This is the one in Koppal.
Koppal actually. So definitely like the kind of the marginal community, the Koppal or in the Bagalkot, Bijapur, and all this, we had these experiences like they're coming back to the station next time crying. When they like this week they have conducted some session, next week they're coming back and some reflection. They're saying what happened after that, what I did, and all those things. I think as Maithreyi pointed out, I think one is the kind of qualitative kind of evaluation, and also the kind of the documenting these cases, like last week this happened, this week what has happened, and then next week that like a collecting data on a kind of a day-to-day basis, regular basis, that concurrent kind of a data capturing and using that for the program is very important. You cannot think of a kind of an evaluation like, okay, we have done the program, some external people will go and evaluate the program. I think that really don't work. It is very hard to understand any of these things. Like integrating the evaluation within the program, that will contribute to improve the program, and that's a great learning to the program implementers also. When you're taking this intervention to somewhere else, how careful, how mindful you need to be when you're taking out of the very cautiously implement the program. Otherwise, the whole like a evaluation will be a kind of just to prove my intervention is good or bad kind of thing. It will not provide a lot of insights to improve your intervention basically.
Got it.
So what Satya what Satya is suggesting then is you have to change the lens of evaluation, right? Usually we are talking about evaluating the learner and saying, okay, now has your life skills increased or improved or whatever. Whereas what Satya is talking about, the fact is that you have to evaluate your program. You have to change the lens to understand how does your program now respond to what it's generating on the field. So,
it could also be evaluating the system. How conducive is the system or the ecosystem to foster life?
Handle this, exactly.
This has been very, very useful. It's been a long, thank you so much for your patience. We've had 2 long hours of, talking. Thank you very much. And we'd love to be able to stay in touch with you. And I do want to understand more about your work at KFPT, because I think that it seems to be a very, very, empowering for the young people that you're working with, adolescents that you're working with. So any last points anybody wants to make from TTF team?
Really? No. Because whatever questions I had, I asked during the session. Okay.
Yeah. I think Roshna's got something.
I have lots to ask, but due to the shortage of time, thank you so much for taking us through your journey. It was really inspiring. A lot of things to think about, a lot of insights that we have got through the experiences that you have shared. So my question is actually, Maithreyi, you mentioned empathy as one of the major skills that should be looked at, and throughout the experiences you have shared, sometimes when we talk about life skills education, usually there is along with that we see values. So how do you, is that the same, or how do you differentiate, or how do you see life skills education at par with value education? Because in our context, the values keep changing depending on the context, depending on the situations. So, yeah.
Thanks. That's a great question. So that's why I said life skills as method, right? Or life skills as tool, or whatever it is, because you're right that values are constantly changing, also not just across time, but also within context. Like Satya was saying, there's a very different value system in the communities we work with, but there's a very different value system I'm dealing with here at home. And often for a life skills facilitator, that becomes the biggest challenge, right? You have a set of values which may not actually resonate with the values of the communities you work with or the students you work with. And how do you then conduct a program in a way that you don't impose your value in the name of skills or in the name of life skills, right? So that's I think that is what we need to recognize, that life skills is just the medium. It's not the content, and that medium can enable a lot of different kinds of conversations. It can enable a lot of different kinds of thinking. And so at the same time, it's very important that each of us, if I am a life skills facilitator, I need to have also sort of reflected on some of these things. Like I also need to have reflected, how empathetic am I? How what is my notion of critical thinking? What is my notion of making a decision? And why is it okay for me to impose my decision on the student that I'm working with? Or is that the goal? Is that the goal of the program at all, that all my students will all now become homogenized? They will all do the same things, they will all pass their 10th standard, they will all get to college, they will all get a job. Is that what I aim to do with my life skills program? So I think it's very important to reflect on the values we carry when we are putting life skills programs into field. So, and to me, they are not the same things at all. Value education is value education. It has nothing to do with life skills. And life skills, I think, is a medium or a method or a tool. That's how I see it.
Maya, you're mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Maithreyi. Thank you, Satya. We will be in touch, and thanks a lot for your time. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, really, Maithreyi and Satya. This was
Really,
a good 2 hours
it's been very,
spent with you.
Thank you so much for your time.